one of the things you talked about is the industrial transformation. And of course, I think reading through some of the previous presentations, there is a 10-point industrial transformation. Can you just explain a little bit more around and provide some clarity around what are some of the specifics within that?
Well, thank you, Peter. Industrial transformation agenda is anchored on 10 pillars. And I've mentioned some of them, made reference to them in my presentation, but I'll just quickly list them just in case it didn't quite stick. Number one is the One District, One Factory initiative, which is basically our entry point for agricultural processing, food processing, agricultural processing. The idea is to be able to add value to the natural resource of each district. This is not government creating state enterprises. This is government supporting the private sector to establish industrial enterprises around the country. You don't want a situation where, as is happening in other African countries, all the industries are concentrated in the capital. And that is why it is difficult to keep people where they belong, in the rural communities. Everybody's flocking into the cities. But this is going to create economic activity throughout the country. So that's the One District, One Factory initiative. Then the next one is what I mentioned about providing support to local companies that are distressed. It's a good thing to start new industries around the country. But what about those who are already existing? Those who have made investments and are distressed and would like to be supported by government. So there's a stimulus company. So that's the other one. The third one is this strategic new anchor industries that I referred to. And there are a number of them. One is the petrochemical industry. We want to add value to our oil and gas. And please, for investors, I want you to listen to this because these are the entry points for new investments. The petrochemical industry, bauxite and aluminium, fully integrated aluminium and bauxite industry. We are also working on the iron and steel industry. We are looking at the automobile vehicle assembly plants. Already, all the major global players have started working on their projects in Ghana. Volkswagen will be rolling out their first car by the end of March. Toyota will be rolling out their first cars by the end of August. We have Nissan, we have Suzuki, we have a company that is interested in doing electric vehicles in Ghana. So you can imagine that this is not just about just focusing on cocoa. We've already started looking at these strategic anchor industries. Of course, there is the garment and textiles, there's vegetable oils and fats, and many others. There are about 10 new strategic sectors that we are focusing on. Then there's the industrial parks. So that is another strategic industry. And then we also have the development of small and medium enterprises, which I believe allows the majority of our private sector operators to be part of this industrial transformation. Another pillar is what we call the industrial subcontracting platform. So we have an online platform that links SMEs into the supply chain of large companies. You know, manufacturing is now essentially based on subcontracting. So that's another. And then the other pillar is about export development, which includes the CFTA. It includes exporting to Europe, the United States, and so on and so forth. Whilst exports are important, another pillar for us is improving our domestic retail market infrastructure, because you need to be able to export and also sell within the local market. So that's the other thing. The ninth one is the business regulatory environment, how to improve the business regulatory environment to attract investors. And last but not the least is institutionalizing public-private dialogue so that government talks to the private sector before they start developing their policies and other interventions. Yeah. So these are the 10 pillars of our transformation agenda.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and I want to throw it out to the audience. So if we can get the mics ready, because I like to throw it to the audience to ask a few questions as well, because otherwise most of my questions will be the things that I am interested in. So my next question is going to be around the one district, one factory, and what are the incentives? As you can imagine, I'm very interested in that. So what are the incentives that you're providing, especially if someone is thinking about one district, one factory?
So you are a potential one district, one factory investor. And yeah, so there's a corporate tax holiday for 5 years. There's exemption from duties and taxes and levies on your equipment and machinery that you bring in under the 1D, 1F. There's exemption on duties on your raw materials that you bring in for your 1D, 1F. And then there's exemption from payment of withholding taxes. And like in other countries, there's also a guaranteed repatriation of your dividends. There's a guarantee against expropriation and nationalization. And then there's also an expatriate worker quota that is provided. That's if foreign investors are involved in the 1D, 1F. Yeah. And there are a few others, yes.
How, Minister, are we really going to persuade the 5 or 10 chocolate manufacturers to put a viable good factory in Ghana that can export then chocolate around the world?
For over a century, Ghana has been exporting raw cocoa beans and to some extent semi-processed cocoa products for the chocolate manufacturing companies around the world. Between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, we control over 65% of global output of cocoa. However, what comes to Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, what comes to the poor farmers in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, is a tiny fraction of the value chain benefits of what, because the investors, the big cocoa chocolate manufacturers, have always said that they need to be closer to the market. This has been the argument. And I'm sure you know that for you to convert cocoa to chocolate, you need a formula. You need the how do you call this? The recipe. And these are guarded secrets. And so if investors for over a century have been buying our cocoa beans and have failed to respond to requests to build chocolate factories from source, then as you are speaking my language now, we should be, and that is why we are here. So I'm suggesting to you as investors, whether you are going to be an intermediary or whether it's going to be Peter who is going to provide money from, you're a big man. Why is it that you cannot...
Big man by size, not by anything else.
Why is it that you cannot provide the kind of financing that allows an African to be able to set up a major chocolate factory? So this is it's not only for cocoa, for all our commodities, but that's the global economic architecture. But that's why we are selling to you, our countries. All this that I'm talking about is for you to understand that if you invest in a chocolate manufacturing company, that you can reach not just Africa, but you can reach Asia, probably a bigger market than in the traditional market destination. So we're talking the same language.
There's so many trade agreements around the world. How is Africa going to position itself to effectively do this intertrade between one another when most of our commodities are almost similar? So I don't know if Ghana's been thinking about, what do we do between ourselves that allows us to compete equitably? Because once there's a skewing of trade relations, then things start breaking down. So has this been discussed in the various discussions that the AFTA folks have been having? Thank you.
You remember I made reference to each country taking steps to position itself to take advantage of the CFTA. And that means you need to industrialize. You need to move away from the mono-commodities that you're talking about. So you're absolutely right. Ghana is not going to be exporting cocoa to Cote d'Ivoire because we produce the same thing. However, there are other things that if we industrialize and start adding value to our natural resources beyond our mono-commodity, then it expands the opportunity for the CFTA. All this that I was talking about, it was just to demonstrate that in Ghana, because we knew that the CFTA was coming, CFTA has been on the drawing board since 2012. Because we knew it was coming, particularly for our government under the leadership of our president, current president, we've taken steps to move aggressively towards value addition and industrialization, which is the only way you can go beyond your commodity and start trading.
Thank you. Second question this is my last question, right? I've just negotiated to take one more question, so this is my last question.
Well, within the context of climate change, what priority has the government provided for responsible manufacturing, the green economy, and climate-smart industrial transformation for the implementation of your trade and development strategy? Thank you.
Underpinning our industrial strategy and all the things that we are doing in Ghana is sustainable development. And sustainable development, obviously, has implications for mainstreaming climate change, mainstreaming not just climate change, but climate variations, because I think sometimes we confuse the two. And all the requirements for sustainable development is a major part of our policy formulation process. And remember, industrialization is a multi-sectoral activity. So I am talking about this because I'm Minister for Industry, but the Minister for Environment, Science and Technology provides an input into this. My colleague, the Minister for Communications, provides an input into this. Those involved in other, let's say, in the green advocacy groups, they also provide an input in this. But last but not the least, I talk about this because I'm in government. But through the public-private dialogue mechanism that I was talking about, which is one of the pillars in our transformation agenda, the private sector, including advocacy groups that champion sustainable development, are all part of the policy formulation process and for our industrial strategy. So it is there, except that we didn't get enough opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you very much. I think we're done.